Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're very excited to have you. This is brought to you by the SBDC of New Jersey, Small Business Development Center. This is NJ Thrive, small business webinars. We provide with weekly webinars to help small businesses grow, thrive, and start their business. So we're here to help you guys. I'm your host, Marjorie Salas, and I'm also an NJSBDC consultant. And I also own a marketing agency and have 13 years of experience. So this is part of the tech team. We are America's New Jersey Small Business Development Centers Network tech team. We provide no-cost pitch to proposal consulting, training and events starting at zero cost, and exclusive small business tech resources. You can see the map. You can find a center near you to provide you with all the help and information you need to help your business grow, thrive, and succeed. Today's agenda and headlines. The SBA announces new cybersecurity grants for recipients for 2023. There's a short read. You can click on the link, and it talks about how Washington Administrator Isabella Casillas Guzman, head of the U.S. Small Business Association and the voice in President Biden's cabinet for America's 33 million small businesses, now recipients of $6 million in total funding. This is very interesting, and it also has additional resources for you to follow up and get more information. We also have NJEDA announces over $400,000 in asset activation planning grants, launching phase 2 of redevelopment grant program. I was yesterday listening to the presentation about this, and it has great opportunities for small businesses. You can go into the website of NJEDA, find out exactly when it's deadline to submit for the grants. And last but not least, we have Sustain and Serve. NJ distributes over 5 million meals. This is great. Also, a press release from the NJSBDC. This is really, really good because you are giving back to the community. And actually, I love the fact that this is also in Spanish for the Spanish-speaking community. All right, so let me get back to the presentation. Things to keep in mind that we ask everyone to please type all your questions in the Q&A box. That's where we will pick them and we will answer them. We also ask you to complete a very simple survey. It's only 3 minutes long. Once you complete that survey, we will reply back with the presentation that our special speaker will send you. This is number 6, proposing winning SBIR/STTR research projects. This is really, really cool, and we're getting close to the last part of the series, so you got to make sure you stay tuned for September 28th. And today we're very happy to have Cheryl Vickroy. She's also an NJSBDC consultant, and she's part of the tech team. Welcome, Cherry. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Marjorie, and good afternoon to everyone. Welcome to our session today. We'll make a quick switch to sharing my screen. And then we'll continue from there. Great. All right, so hopefully you can see the introductory slide here. Whoops, it looks like we've gone ahead by one, so just let me try to get that back. Okay, Well, the first slide was just an introductory slide. It welcomes you this afternoon to the topic today, which is proposing winning SBIR STTR research strategies. And this is actually a second part from an earlier presentation that I made in June. So if you feel like you're coming in the middle and you'd like to go online and find that other presentation, you're welcome to do that. I'll reintroduce myself here. I am in Wisconsin, located in Wisconsin, but have been working with NJSBDC for the past several months. And I consider myself at this point a professor of practice. What does that mean? Well, first of all, in the first half of my career, I had worked in industry, and I had about 20 years of general management, which really helped me to understand at a very deep level all the functional areas of business. Since then, I've actually become an entrepreneur myself. I have a private consulting firm, and I work mainly in commercializing innovation technology or innovative technology. I've collaborated on the acquisition of well more than $150 million in SBIR STTR funding. As well, I've been inside 5 different early stage firms, 2 of which I've led as CEO. And I'm an instructor in the University of Wisconsin-Madison, a Master's in Biotechnology program where I designed and teach a course on commercializing innovation. I've had a couple of other roles as well, one of which is as an angel investor in early stage technologies. And so I bring a very broad perspective to this realm, both as a practitioner, as a consultant, and also as an investor. I have a problem with advancing my slides. So Marjorie, are you able to pull my presentation and advance the slides? I don't seem to be able to do that. Otherwise I can.
Cheryl, can you click on?
There we are. Got it. Okay, sorry about that, everybody. Okay, so we'll do a very quick review because sometimes new people are joining us who haven't been taking part in the series before. What is SBIR STTR? Well, the initials mainly stand for Small Business Innovation Research and then Small Business Technology Transfer Research. Today, we're focusing on 2 elements in those titles, mainly the fact that in order to participate, you must be a small business and it must involve advancement of research in some way or another, innovative research to get to a product. There are 2 flavors here. One is as a standalone applicant, and the other is if you have a partnering research institution, such as an academic partner like Rutgers, Princeton, and so on and so forth. Some of you may have that kind of partnering situation, and some of you may be standing alone in your application. There are many reasons to pursue SBIR STTR funding. The main motivation is typically that the applicant wants to develop new products or services for commercial sale. Rather than just conducting research for research's sake, they literally want to have something going out into the market and see the experience the fruition of that, as well as seeing their financial return from doing all of that. In any case, no matter where you are in the process, it's worth it for the strategies that you develop, the planning that you do, and the people and partners that you meet who can help you along the way. This slide shows all 3 phases of what we call the STTR, SBIR STTR roadmap in terms of the technical readiness across the top. Phase 1, we're looking to prove feasibility. Phase 2, we're looking to prototype something. And phase 3, we're actually launching something into the market where we're selling, for example, these motors. So with respect to the research, In phase one, it is almost exclusively research with just a little bit of exception. You need to think about in advance the market, etc., but the entire application will be mainly focused on what it is that you propose technically. Where the technology fits in a phase two application is you have to produce a final report on any phase one award that you may have received, as well as a much longer, lengthier technical proposal for what you'd like to ask the government to fund in phase two. The reason why it's heavier at phase two is because the awards are much greater. In phase one, they usually range from 100,000 to about 275 or 295. And then in phase two, you can receive up to $3 million. So it's quite substantial. Today, we'll look at a couple of slides that came from a prior presentation. Again, for those who are coming in new today, that deal with agency mission fit, correctly defining the problem that a buyer has and your specifically innovative solution, understanding the technical state of the art of your innovation, thinking about the fact that the scope of your work proposed must equal the budget, and then IP protection and various resources and capabilities that you'll need in order to succeed in gaining federal funding. Then we'll move on and look at what makes a competitive research proposal, utilizing the correct point of view, which is that of the small business, understanding that phase one is focused mainly on technical aspects, but with a little bit of forward thinking about the business, as I mentioned a moment ago, deeply understanding the review criteria, and I'll show examples for a couple of different agencies, and the impact of that on your research methods, as well as the fact that in phase one, the budget is limited. So how do we design and conduct a limited study that can yield valuable insights and then analyze and interpret that data to help us move forward? So we'll begin with the point of view. A small business is the applicant. For those of you who already have a small business, this will seem obvious and be quite understandable, but we have many applicants who are sometimes beginning their career as researchers. Maybe they start in an academic institution like Rutgers, Princeton, etc., or maybe they start even in a firm, but as a very small firm, but as a technician, and don't know how to think from the business perspective. So I'm going to help you with that a little bit today. First of all, in order to apply in this realm, a small business must exist and be registered in several ways as a small business with certain websites, agencies in the federal government, and so on and so forth. If you don't have a small business that's already formed and is at least understanding the fact that registration has to be part of this, you wouldn't be eligible for this program. You'd have to begin there before you actually apply. Now, the technical work itself builds from often either work that's done in an academic institution or the prior work of you, your team, yourselves. But we consider that in this realm, we consider that what's called preliminary data. In other words, it's the data that you have before you become a small business and before you attempt to ask for additional money from the federal government. The small business must be aimed towards commercialization. It is not just a small business that stood up to conduct research for research's sake. That's really more of a mission of research institutions. And in this case, a small business or a business is the instrument that's needed to further develop the work. I say all this because even though conducting research is very, very technical in the phase one, there are some things that you need to also consider in terms of advancing your business. Now, even though SBIR STTR is a holistic program, from the perspective of the Small Business Administration, the rules differ greatly from grants that are provided to universities, communities, etc. They're very, very different when you're talking about the small business as an applicant. And building a business requires another set of skills well beyond research and experimentation. This is a startup company map that was developed by an academic in 2008, and you can just glance at it and see how very complicated it is. I want to highlight just a couple of things. Across the top, for example, we show the company development stage, from concept to what's called pre-seed, to early seed stage, mid-seed, later, and so on and so forth. And then highlighted right here on the left side are the technical things that you would be doing in this row, such as invention and discovery, prototyping, early prototyping, for example, then a lab prototype, and so on and so forth. But there are these other activities that go on as well with respect to the technology, whether or not you have an IP, such as a patent or a trademark, the business development, and the management team. Now, this material is rather old. It was an early start at looking at what does it look like in order to be a early stage firm. When I have used this as a guide, I haven't found it to be exceptionally correct. In other words, some of the timings are off and things like that. But my main point in showing this slide is just to show you how many different moving parts and pieces there are as you enter this realm. Also, one must consider, as the technology is developing from discovery all the way to later stage mass manufacturing, different sources of funding and financing. And you'll notice that I've highlighted SBIR, STTR here along the very bottom. It's one of the sources of funding that comes in very early at the ideation stage and also at proof of concept, pre-seed, and so on and so forth. But it comes in before angel funding, early stage venture funds, and certainly before VC funding, which is a long ways down the line. So stage setting, we've looked at the big picture. Now I want to narrow down and speak specifically to you about the goals of phase one and what exactly you'll need to do to think about this strategically and then to conduct your research. So the goal of phase one is essentially technical proof of concept or feasibility. What constitutes such proof will vary a lot depending upon the type of technology that you have. In other words, proof of a life sciences type technology like a therapeutic or a diagnostic is going to be defined differently than that of something like advanced materials or computational technologies. So you have to think about your own realm, your industry, etc., and ask yourself, what constitutes such proof? Is it safety? Is it efficacy? Is it a validation and testing in some way? And this, again, varies by industry or domain. But essentially, you want to set yourself up so that you're ready at the end of your phase one proposal. You want to be ready to ask for follow-on phase two funding, which is aimed at prototyping. And here we're talking about a commercial prototype, not a lab prototype, not the most earliest stage of conducting research on something that you've just built yourself and you can't replicate. We're literally talking about being able to prototype something that's commercially ready. As I mentioned earlier, we do need to begin to think about the market to correctly define the problem being solved. Such basic things as the size of the market, what are the needs of the buyer, and who might be buying this product that you will eventually produce. Occasionally, we use this phase one to begin interacting with the Department of Defense to learn about their specific specifications. So if you think you have a DoD eligible technology, sometimes phase one doesn't include a technical proof of concept, but literally is a tiny award to learn about what their specifications are that you would need to create something to fit. Now I switch briefly to a much later roadmap. This is 10 years after Albers developed her work. And this one I think is more accurate. This one shows just two columns that we're going to focus on here, the technical milestones and the business milestones. So in a phase one application, you're focusing mainly on advancing from the point at which your research is validated to a technical development plan, to materials and feasibility established, and so on and so forth, market and feasibility established. If you'd like, you can look at this slide after our presentation to see the business milestones that walk alongside with this, as well as the funding milestones that you might consider for this type of funding. Again, I take these guides a little bit loosely because they'll vary based on your the type of technology that you're working with and the domain that you're moving into. So a couple of examples. Now we'll move towards thinking about the scoring criteria, how you will be assessed on your proposal content. And we'll look here, first of all, at NIH and then at NSF. And so we have some specifics from their proposal criteria. NIH is looking for an overall impact, the likelihood for your project that you propose to exert a sustained, powerful influence on the state of the art with respect to your research involved. And they use a scoring criteria that considers 5 main criteria to determine scientific and technical merit. They offer a separate score for each of these. The review criteria include significance, the quality of the investigator, the level of innovation, the approach that you will take to conduct your technical research, and the environment in which you will be participating. Each of these aspects are looked at and they're assessed with respect to how much supportive evidence have you provided that you have a quality team, innovation, etc., with logic and reasoning, and they assign a score to each of these from 1 to 9, with 1, the low score, actually being the best score. That therefore indicates a scoring range of 5 if everything was perfect, up to 45 if everything was unfortunately not mature enough to be ready for an application. I mentioned a new word here, the pay line. The pay line is what kind of score do you need in order to be funded? The pay line often hovers around 19 plus or minus, depending upon the cohort that you're being scored against. And typically, historically, about 20% of the applications are funded. Now we take a little deeper dive into the significance itself and each of the criteria. For significance, NIH wants to know how important is the problem, how big is the critical barrier to progress in the field, and then several other things, but they want to know how significant essentially is this issue. So there you're talking about things like the prevalence, if it's a healthcare issue, prevalence of the disease, difficulty in state-of-the-art technologies, do they have significant flaws in the current approaches, etc. And I'll just mention briefly that if you were doing not a phase 1 project, but if you were doing a phase 2, a fast track, or another type of later application, They'd also care about the significant section. Does the commercialization plan demonstrate a high probability of success? The investigators are assessed on whether or not their skills and capabilities are well suited to the project, with a little bit of look at if they're early stage investigators or new investigators, do they have the appropriate background and training? If you have multiple PDs or PIs, they'll want to assess if the investigators have complementary experience, integrated experience, and do they have some sort of leadership or organizational structure or governance that's appropriate for the project in order to collaborate successfully. Innovation, this is very key. It's the I in SBIR. So the agency will assess, does your application challenge and seek to shift current research or clinical practice paradigms utilizing novel concepts, approaches, methods, instrumentations, or interventions? This means that the applicant will need to have a good understanding of the current state of the art out in either practice, if it's a clinical element that's already being solved in some way, or in theory, if it's a brand new type of technology that is still basically being understood for future application. This one is very, very critical, and critical across to every single agency, not just the NIH, by the way. The approach, this is really where you convey the meat or the heart of your technical research. So what they'll assess here is the strategy that you propose, the methods, the analyses. Are they well reasoned? And are they appropriate to accomplish the aims of your specific project? As well, will the overall strategy establish feasibility, and will particularly risky aspects be appropriately managed? If you're doing a life sciences application and you are far enough along that you're utilizing human subjects, there are some special criteria that I put in the footnotes below. Lastly, the fifth criteria is the environment. So they'll need to know, within your small business, do you have the equipment and physical resources available to the investigators that are needed in order to conduct the work that you propose? Or if it's an STTR, do you have the proper institutional support from your collaborator? All of these things, before I move forward, all of these things, again, are assessed and scored from a realm of strengths and weaknesses and given a numerical score, which then adds up to the total score for your application. And it is assessed directly against those other applicants who are in your cohort at this time. NSF's review criteria are different. They tend to look a little farther down the road on the commercial side. And so I've noted here, begin with the end in mind, because they have a reasonable amount of information that's requested in a phase 1 application. I'm jumping to the bottom of this slide here on the lower left, about the market opportunity, the company and the team, the product, technology, and even the competition. So knowing well who you're competing against as a product, and even a nod towards a revenue and finance plan. Now, this is not scored in phase 1, but it is requested. So you do have to do a lot more thinking about what the business will look like with NSF than with other agencies. And this is scored, of course, in phase 2 applications. So if we think instead about the technical side, really there are 2 major criteria instead of 5 with NIH. One is the intellectual merit, and that is completely about the quality of the proposed work to advance science and engineering through research and education. And then they also think or ask you to think about and respond to what are the broader impacts of your work. And this is related to the potential to benefit society and contribute to the achievement of specifically desired societal outcomes. So they tend to tackle sort of bigger societal problems and want to know a great deal about the rigor of the intellectual merit. These aspects are judged instead of just strong or weak and a numerical score. They are judged according to is the work excellent? Is it very good? Is it good? Is it fair, or is it poor? And I've detailed these things here along the right, from outstanding down to a proposal which has serious deficiencies. Mainly in phase one, what they're looking at is the research strategy. Now we shift towards that, with the exception of NSF. So I do a little bit deeper dive here into what's, depending on the agency, is either called the research strategy, or sometimes it's called the work plan, and sometimes it's called the project description, depending upon which agency you're applying to. The scope of the work has to be innovative. It can't just be an incremental improvement, and it must fit the budget that you're given, as well as have all the elements that are needed to support the proposed work ready and available in your environment that you propose. Essentially, in order to be innovative, you're building from preliminary data, which might be your own work so far that you show, or work of others that you cite, and you're creating a logical argument that what you propose is very high risk, but doable by your team because of the special skills or capabilities that you have. This is all detailed in usually what's called the approach section. It might have a different term associated with it, but it's most often called the approach section, where you'll state the overall goal of the technical work. You'll identify what some agencies call the objectives, some agencies call the aims, and that is what it is that you'll be doing. And then you'll have a lower level of granularity underneath those, and those are the tasks. How will you do the work that you propose? This is where, again, you are evaluated based on methods, and I'm going to use the word approach again here. But scientifically, are you using the proper method or approach to get you to this proof of feasibility? It's important to also include a measure of success or milestones, indicating how you'll know if you have succeeded in conducting the work. And more often than not, you need to have a Gantt chart or a graphic to accompany the text explanation of what it is that you're proposing. Often we begin with an outline of the scope to prove feasibility. And the reason why we begin with an outline and some high-level thinking is because the scope may change as you think about it. It's very rare to have a work scope, come out perfect with just one go through. It's more of an iterative process where you lay down your scope, then you check against the budget numbers and see if it's actually going to meet the budget that's provided for this particular work. And then you may have to either reduce the scope, or rarely you might be able to increase the scope if you find you have more money available. Keep in mind that the reviewers can only evaluate what you put in the proposal. They can't read your mind. And so if you've taken something for granted and you haven't well explained what will prove that your idea is feasible, what theoretical work might you need, what scale models might you need, what proofs of efficacy might you need, they can't read your mind. And so you need to be very, very specific, as though you're talking to maybe someone in your family or a person who needs to understand the full picture of what you're talking about here, not just the highlights. Again, the scope must equal the budget. So we think about this is crucial because essentially we're again talking about the business as an applicant, and a business has to think about the budget as well. They have to think about, okay, I'm asking for this level of resources. If I'm asking for this level of resources, I can only propose work that is consistent with that level of resources. So we think about, what is the endpoint deliverable? How will it solve a problem for a buyer? How much time does it really take in a business to convene a brand new team that may not have worked together before and get everyone on the team pulling in the same direction? How much does the work really cost using market rate salaries? This is not a business that survives by utilizing postdocs or grad students to do the work. The salaries have to be market rate in order to attract people to your team. And then we think about, what does it cost to also build out the business alongside conducting the research? With this, because the budget is so crucial, I'm going to take a sidestep and do a tiny introduction to budgeting for SBIR STTR, and that is a preview of a later session that we'll have. So I want to mention a couple things if you're new to this realm. If you're new to this realm, know that the small business can take 7% of the total cost of the project as profit. And it's crucial that you do so if you're applying for an SBIR or an STTR. Why? Because it's the only unrestricted funding that you will get. Each other type of funding in your budget is restricted to its use by how you define your work and how you define what you're going to spend on it. So this 7% fee is the only unrestricted funding that you can use for everything from patenting to marketing, which are otherwise completely unallowable, to, in fact, you could use it to do additional research if you wished. So it's the widest realm, totally used for anything. That's why it's important to protect that at all costs and take the full 7%. In this case, because you must also build a business, overhead is needed to do that. And this covers things like rent, fringe benefits for your employees, accounting services, tax preparation, certain allowable costs, and that overhead can be up to 40% of your total direct costs, the costs of advancing the technology. Essentially, if we think about it that way, we scoop off some amount that's pretty substantial and leaves really only around 53% of the total budget allowed for the technical work. If you go in knowing that and think about a smaller amount of money for your technical work, you're more likely to be accurate the first time you try to scope the work and then match it to the budget that you get for a phase one. So given those severe budget limitations, for those of you who've conducted research before and understand things like design of experiments and statistical analysis and interpretation, is that even possible? Or how can you design something that will happen on a very small scale with fewer replicates, maybe with one kind of control that's more generic perhaps than what you might otherwise choose? Ask yourself if you can justify use of statistical analysis in your work, or are the sample sizes simply too small because of budget constraints? Keep in mind that the agencies only want proof of feasibility in a very rough way. If you think you can go farther than that, fine, but they really only for phase one are looking for proof of concept, and will count that as an outcome if you show some evidence that the device or the therapeutic or the software that you're proposing will work as expected. It can be ugly, it can be dirty, it can be non-replicable in terms of a commercial, commercially robust way, but that would be a proof of concept or proof of feasibility. Essentially, though, you do want to develop data that's interpretable as progress towards that next step, which is prototyping, and or will allow decision-making in some manner or another. If you can't even do that, then supplemental funding will definitely be needed, and you'll have to figure out where to get that from either perhaps family, friends, your own personal assets, and so on and so forth. Ideally, by the time we get to doing research for phase 2, at that point, your design of experiments is much more rigorous, and you can actually do statistical analysis and interpretation that is meaningful. Now, back to the environment and the team. Is the environment and the team supportive of the work? Are the team members' skills sufficient? Or are certain skills and capabilities missing? An example would be if you are going to propose statistical analysis and no one on the team has any statistical analysis expertise, then you may need to hire as a consultant a statistician. These things always just have to match with what you're proposing. So we ask ourselves who goes on the payroll, whose skills might we need just only temporarily. Those roles might be able to be filled by consultants or contractors in phase 1 or even in phase 2. But there are some core skills and capabilities that you probably want to build within the actual company. And then you'll ask yourself as well, can certain tasks be delegated to folks with lesser skill levels, such as technicians? You may have very few senior scientists on your payroll, but you may have a lot of technicians in order to have someone overseeing the work and then someone actually conducting the work. And lastly, who has the sufficient project management skills to oversee the project altogether and work to ensure its success? Now, normally that would be the principal investigator or the PI or PD. Altogether, and this slide is again a review slide. If you've been with me all along, we've shown this time and time again, because the whole proposal needs to have a compelling story behind it. The message is there's an important problem and it's important to a particular buyer or user. It's significant to them and it's something that money should be invested in to develop. Essentially, the current solutions are inadequate. How do they compare? What are their strengths and weaknesses? What is the comparison and how do you shine as being innovative in this regard? How do you stand out? Do you stand out based on your approach? How is it different? And so on and so forth. And of course, is there, at the end of the phase 2 application, is there a viable commercial opportunity, at least looking from this point of view at this point? These things taken together will explain to the funding agency why it is that you, more than others, will win their funding. So we've taken about 45 minutes today so far, which leaves us a good amount of time for additional questions. I tried to be responsive to people all along the spectrum of applicants, from brand new to already working on something. And I tried to be responsive to those applicants who have a business background and who come from a purely academic background. But all of this is very complicated and can be difficult. Please don't feel reluctant in any way to not ask questions or to come to our team to help you really get started and perhaps to save time and effort that you would otherwise spend working on your own without our feedback. Federal funding is available and highly competitive. The planning that you invest with us can reap rewards. You can learn these techniques for success, and we are literally here to help you. My last slide is just to put up some additional resources to link you to some very generic high-level tutorials at SBIR.gov, a list of the participating agencies, and then, of course, the links to our team. So with that, I'll open up the Q&A. And Marjorie, did you intend to read me the questions?
Yes. Well, thank you everyone for attending. Thank you, Cheryl, for all the information that you provided us. I was taking notes myself. Thank you so much. So we have a few questions. Just a quick reminder, everyone that it's on chatting on our chat section, please remember to submit your questions on our Q&A section. And I will answer for you the first question, which someone asked if we will share the presentation and video. We will share both. The video will be shared within 48 hours for you to rewatch on demand. And the PowerPoint will be shared once you send your 3-minute, your quick survey. It provides great feedback to everyone, and Cheryl will appreciate it very much. So I will start with the first question that says from Matt. Is it acceptable to use contract manufacturers to assist in product development?
Hi, Matt. Thank you so much for this question. Absolutely. Often when you're building a small business, and of course I'm answering this without knowing exactly which stage of development your business is, but in the beginning you simply can't have every resource available. Contract manufacturers are permitted in many instances, and they, depending upon how we define the work that they'll do for you, they may even be able to be counted as a direct cost of the small business when we get to the budgeting. So there are some high-level requirements as far as who does what amount of the work. If you read the guidance from your specific agency and you're finding it confusing, please reach out, because there's a lot of ifs, ands, or buts. But yes, in general, contract manufacturers can be used. Sometimes they're highly encouraged, and they make the most sense for you as a small business owner if it's something that you don't have the capability to do.
Thank you for answering that question for Matt. I have Thomas here said, if you have already submitted your business plan and slide deck to the SBIR team, what would be the next step? Will they reach out to us, or do they have to reach out to someone, or else do we have to reach out to someone?
Hi, Thomas. Thanks for the question. It's unclear to me, based on your question, which agency you're talking about. I assume it might be NSF, because they require a project pitch up front. Other agencies don't require that. And so if I'm correct in assuming that you're talking about NSF and you've gone online with them and submitted your pitch as they request, then they should reach back to you. Oh, it says, oh no, somebody else has just popped up something.
Oh, he said NJEDA.
The EDA?
Yeah, that's what he typed up. NJEDA.
Oh, okay. Thank you for clarifying that. That is an agency that's completely separate from our agency. They also provide assistance in different ways, but I think what I would recommend in this case is, if you're looking for SBIR STTR funding, you also register with us and submit those things to us as well, in order to help you with this slice of work that takes place in economic development. You may, in fact, if you're working with NJEDA, I don't know this to be sure, but it's possible you're looking for a different type of funding support than SBIR STTR.
We have an anonymous attendee submitted a question. It says, if your business is less than a year old, but you have longer experience in the area of your proposal, are you eligible for funding? Also, do you have financial history to be considered?
Thank you for your question. Also an excellent question. The age of your business matters not at all. You're eligible if you have less than 500 employees, but you can be 1 year old or 500 years old. The size requirement is really about size. So it's great that you might have a longer experience in the proposal. What was the second part of that question? I think I lost it on my screen.
Um,
There was something else after the age. History of financial support, I think it was. Thank you. Yeah. History of financial support. This can be your first funding. It often is. If an applicant is coming out of, say, for example, an academic institution, it might be the very first type of funding for the small business. There's one agency that does ask about the history of financial funding, but many do not. So you'd have to follow the instructions to see if they want to know that. It's just a minor, it's a minor question that doesn't encourage them to reject you. They're just gathering information there and kind of trying to understand what your situation is. So hopefully that my answer here is responsive for you.
all right, we have another question from Giatano. It says, what if your project original research involves an analog of Schedule 1 drug, EI fisolvin, I'm sorry for the mispronunciation, PSILOCYBIN to ISS. Any
psilocybin?
psilocybin. That's interesting.
So you wonder if it will be funded if it's an analog of psilocybin? Is that what you're asking? I think so.
Yeah.
I'm going to assume that that's correct. They do fund innovation in that realm. That I happen to know some things about that realm myself, not from having personal experience in taking these things, but having attended some conferences that happen about that. So I'm aware of the history of that type of funding, and I would encourage you to apply. Again, you might want to ask for a consultation to share a little bit more information so that we can figure out if this is truly innovative and how. But if you're asking in a generic way, is that kind of research being funded now? It is.
Thank you for answering that. So we have a question from Cheryl that says, can you elaborate on what supportive environment could be for a software business?
Sure. Hi, Cheryl. That is probably the most easy one to create because you don't really need a lot of equipment. It could be a fairly virtual team. It could be an office in a commercial office space, and it could be yourself and a computer, and that's about it. The reason why some of these requirements are so may not fit exactly the type of work that you're talking about is because so many different types of technology are funded. This is very, very crucial if it's a life sciences technology, a biological thing, even a medical device, et cetera, where huge machines are needed or lots of expensive equipment. But in your case, it's a low hurdle.
Hey, Grace. So she submitted a second part to the question that says, will you be talking about various requirements registrations?
Yes, I hope so. We have scheduled so far the topic for September, but I believe that I'll be talking about registrations later on after September, hopefully yet this fall. Also, if you find that you need to know now, that would be another good reason to just reach out to any of us. We can help you without waiting.
Okay, we have another question from an anonymous attendee that says, phase one seems mostly conceptual / planning / organization. What is the money itself used for?
Yes, thank you for your question. If it seems that way, based on my presentation, I hope that's not the case. Because my intent in talking broadly, it's a challenge because I'm talking in many cases broadly because I don't know what type of technology each of the attendees actually have. It is absolutely not about conceptual planning and organization. All that has to be done before you even ready your proposal, because you have to have the idea about the design of the experiments. You have to have the idea about your scientific approach to the questions that you're trying to answer. You have to know, specifically what materials you're going to be using and have them in your budget. So it's not at all conceptual and planning. It's well beyond that. The money is for executing experiments that you articulate to the agency so that they can evaluate based on your articulation.
Thank you for answering that. So we have a question from Sharon that says, can you elaborate on principles in the business? The initial small funding dollars mean that the startup funders often need to keep their day job in order to make it work. Does the PI have to be full-time employees of the company?
Thank you, Sharon. This is an important point. The PI does have to be employed by the company at least 51% at the time of the award. They don't have to be employed by the company at the time of submitting the application. But if an award is received, part of the funding is to go towards their salaries, keep them, working, etc., on this project that's proposed, not on their other day job work. And so there's a shift in their employment at the time of the award, and they become an employee of the business at least 51% of their time.
Okay, so we have one more question from Philip A. Can you contact, for a consultory on it. I guess this is for consulting you. It says, can I connect with Cheryl with you for a consultant on my technical document for an NIH proposal?
Sure. Yes. Normally when you go in and register, we have a person who assigns work to each of us on the tech team. I'm only one of many. But if you have a special request based on the depth of my life sciences background, I think there's a way to ask for me specifically.
Okay, so I have another question here that says, do you have any tips on actual funding opportunities using the website for resources? It says SBIR .gov/SBIR research current topics. I guess it's looking for tips on funding.
Oh, well, to be quite honest, I don't generally use that site except for generalities, and to try to understand the different agencies and what their missions are. Once I have a sense of which agency I'm going to target and how my work fits with their mission, then I go instead to the specific websites of the agencies and there search for the funding opportunities. Now, you can also search on a different site that I didn't provide a link for here. It's called grants.gov, grants.gov. Personally, that one can also be a little confusing because they use a fair amount of jargon. So they'll ask you to, you can search on keywords, but probably the list of things that's going to be returned to you will be more extensive than what will make it an easy search for you. What I would say in this regard is if you're looking to do this quickly and efficiently, what you might do is, again, register for consulting and ask one of us to help you. It can be an awful lot of topics to cull through, and sometimes surprising things happen. For example, you would think that the NIH would be very, very interested in funding breast cancer research. Ironically, the agency that has the most funding available for breast cancer research is actually the Army, because there are so many spouses and even nowadays female Army, female people in the Army who end up having this disease. So I use that as an example to just point out that it's tricky sometimes to figure out on your own which agency might be the best fit for you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Cheryl. Now I'm going to share my screen now.
Great. I have extra time if you want to stay on and do more questions, but it sounds like we may have gotten through most of them. I'll let you decide, Marjorie.
If you want, we can do like a few more questions. That's fine.
How many more are there, do you think?
We answered 15 and we still have 15 left.
Okay. Well, I leave it up to you. I have a little bit of extra time here if people want to stay on.
Let's do 2 more questions.
Okay.
It says, Raquel Barnes, would you recommend smaller business to apply for an RWJF grant to find larger entities to collaborate on grants?
RWJF, Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. I specialize in SBIR, STTR, so I've encountered that once or twice along the way, but I don't know much currently accurate about their program. So I'd have to say I'm probably not qualified to answer that without looking it up and trying to figure it out. I appreciate the question, though, very much. I just don't happen to know that right off the top.
Okay, we have another question. It says, having uncovered unexpected deficiency/failure in phase 1 project prototype, is it legit to apply for phase 2 to redesign the product and to address said deficiencies?
That is also sort of a harder question for me to answer without knowing more. I guess it would depend upon the extent of the failure. If it were, it's common, by the way, that research doesn't work out as you anticipate, despite your best effort. So this is no slight against what you've done here. But if this deficiency was the relatively minor, it's possible you might be able to apply for phase 2, especially if you've gone ahead and corrected some of those things yourselves using private funding or another source of funding. However, if the deficiency or failure was extreme, and this seems obvious when I say it, what you might want to do instead is really start over again, either with the same agency or another agency, but put in another phase 1 proposal. So my answer is a bit vague because I haven't looked at your specific work. One of us could take a look at that and give you a better answer if you'd like.
Well, thank you, Cheryl, for your time and for providing you with such a valuable information. We thank all the attendees and participants. Thank you for all your questions. Please don't forget to scan this QR code to request no-cost consulting for your business. We're thankful to have you. Last but not least, before you leave, make sure you complete your 3-minute survey. It will provide great feedback to Cheryl, and you will also get a copy of your PowerPoint. That's the most important thing. Once again, we are excited for next week. We will have Dusty Lang. She is a part of also of our team. Please scan the QR code that you are seeing to register for the upcoming webinar about innovating in the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. This is a great workshop, so make sure you register for the next week. I will also be hosting it. Please remember, this is NJSBDC NJ Thrives. We provide help to tech innovators. We provide zero-cost consulting. We also help with no-cost pitch proposal. And we also give you small tech resources to help your business grow. Please also scan this QR code that you see now. Thank you for your time. We are here. We hope to see you next week, and I hope you guys enjoy this. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks, everyone.